So you're going to notice as we wrap up the month of April, we're going to spend a lot of time in our New Testament reading challenge in the Old Testament. Now that might make some people say, wait a minute, I thought the whole purpose of this reading challenge was to read through the New Testament. Why are we stopping and going back into the Old Testament from time to time? Well, to be honest with you, there's two reasons. Number one, there's more days in the year than there are chapters in the New Testament. But the most important reason is because we can't understand what's going on in the New Testament without the Old Testament. See, the Old Testament was written, or the New Testament was written by people whose theology, whose beliefs, whose entire religion and way of life is shaped by the Old Testament. We better understand what's being taught in the New Testament when we know the Old Testament. In fact, when you think about the days of the early church and the fact that they relied on Scripture, much like we do today, what is it that they're actually relying on? When Paul encourages Timothy in 2 Timothy 3 to say that all Scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work. What does Paul mean when he says all Scripture? Or think about the book of Acts. What does it mean in Acts 17 when the apostles are preaching to the Bereans? And it says that the Bereans received the word with all eagerness, examining the Scriptures daily to see if these things were so. Where did the apostles get the teachings about who Jesus was? For the most part, the Gospels weren't written yet. Where does Jesus himself get the information? We're going to read Luke 24. We're going to see in verse 27, as Jesus is walking on the Emmaus Road with two disciples who were following Jesus and then were upset that he died, and Jesus chastises them and says, don't you know all this stuff was supposed to happen? What does Jesus do? In verse 27, it says, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the Scriptures the things concerning himself. Jesus even said during his earthly ministry, I'm not here to get rid of the law. As long as the earth is around, not even a jot or a tittle will be removed from the law. He didn't come to replace it. He came to fulfill it. We can't replace the Old Testament with the New Testament just because we say we're a New Testament church. We can't approach the Old Testament as a collection of Sunday school stories that we use in junior church because we need to fill the time somehow. No, the Old Testament is an important, vital part of our Bible. And we can't truly understand the New Testament if we don't understand what's going on in the Old Testament, because the Old Testament is what fueled the ambitions and the desires and the religious beliefs of the early church. They didn't stop following the Old Testament because they had the testimony of Jesus. They believed Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament. So we're going to take time periodically to read in our Old Testament. We're going to pick out chapters that talk about and illustrate and give background into what we are about to read in the New Testament. Read your Old Testament. You can't be the New Testament church without it.